Good to see everybody today. Thank you and welcome back to our second series of the Kitchen Table Conversations through the Men and Masculine Folks Network. Pheng Thao here, using he, him, his pronouns. I welcome back all of you as men to the table and enjoying the conversation that we had 2 weeks ago, and really been thinking a lot about it and looking forward to today's conversation about the effects of toxic masculinity, quote unquote, on our lives in terms of like the not too good aspects of masculinity and manhood, and how it impacts and shapes us as men and masculine individuals. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation and giving a moment for all of you to also briefly introduce yourselves again as well too, so that everybody knows who's here.
Hey everybody, my name is Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I work with men as peacemakers and also involved with the Men and Masculine Folks Network here with Pheng. And I'm just grateful to be back for more conversations. I mean, our chat last time really got me thinking, and there just aren't a lot of spaces like this out there, at least that I've come across, where men and masculine folks really can, dig a little deeper into our own masculinity, what that looks like in our families, in our communities, at our work, all of those things. And then also just, leading into all of the things that are happening right now in our world with the, police brutality, Black Lives Matter movement, as well as COVID and all the effects of that. So I'm just grateful to be back and to continue having this conversation with all of you.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I work for Casa Esperanza. I'm also super happy to be here to have the opportunity to talk to this amazing group of men and folks. Have these deeper conversations that we normally don't have at home, and also give my perspective as a Latino living in the United States and how I grow up, how some of those behaviors are part of that problem right now, that that is part of the unhealthy masculinity, how we can change that in order to provide more support to younger men and masculine folks and try to make a difference in our community. So thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ed Heisler. I use he, him pronouns. I'm also at Men as Peacemakers in Duluth, Minnesota, where the lake is now warmer than the air, so steam is rising up every single day for the past few days. And I would just echo what the other folks said. It's really a joy to be able to be in conversation with other men and masculine folks around this important time in our community and society's trajectory, and it feels like a time when we really are in a position of figuring out who we are going to be as people and who we are going to be as community, and these conversations are incredibly valuable to me in sorting some of that out for myself.
Hello, this is Roderic, Southall, he, him. I am glad to be a part of this conversation today. I think that having these conversations inside of our heads or inside of our organizations is good, but sometimes isolating. And so it's good to be at a table with other folks who you're just meeting, getting to know, to help you think through some of the things that have been rolling around in your head. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, maybe we start off with just going back into our childhood and really thinking about, like, as you were growing up and you were socialized, because that's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about like the effects of unhealthy masculinity and patriarchy in my life, is like how I was raised and what was happening as I was growing up, and who was teaching me about how to be men and who was teaching me how to be masculine in this world. And so that would be what I would be curious about it, in terms of asking all of us to really think about today, is how was it for you growing up, and in terms of you being shaped to be the man that you should be, not the man that you want to be, but the man that you should be, right? Because we know that those two things are very different. And so I leave that as a beginning for us and a foundation for us to be curious and explore and really talk about that in terms of the effects of unhealthy masculinity on our lives.
Well, cool. I guess I can share a little bit about me growing up as a Latino in Puerto Rico. I also live in Dominican Republic. I lived there for also 7 years. But me as a Latino, I grew up having a lot of expectations, as a only boy. I have two sisters, one younger, one older. So those expectations of as a man, since I was a little kid, I was supposed to take care of my sisters. I was the man of the house when my dad wasn't home. So from that, from the pressure from my friends to have a lot of girlfriends in order to be successful, and expectations in the society, of what I'm supposed to be successful. So, and how have that vision changed with me now as a father of two daughters? But growing up, the expectation of men, you're supposed to have a lot of girlfriends to be successful or to be cool. Also, maybe having some type of conversation with my parents about healthy sexuality, but not that many. I learned a lot of it from my friends in school, on the streets, from pornography. What's supposed to be a sexual relationship, things that really not very healthy. But that expectation of how, as a man, how we're supposed to be. Maybe my parents didn't talk that much, maybe because a lot of those topics were taboo topics, or, maybe conversations that they never had with them, their parents never had with them. So how that, make me see life differently, and how it, now as an adult, realize how many mistakes I make, how many times I say things, or just because I was quiet, I was part of this unhealthy masculinity that we see still now, and how that pushed me now as a father of two daughters of try to do more, just to talk about my experiences. And even now, youth have probably more access to technology and videos that maybe we had in the past, but how we can support them, how we can, with my stories, open maybe the mind of some of the students, or the men that I talk to in my circles, to make us realize, the harm that we have done, and how that harm has reflected now in the society that we live. So for me, being a middle child, two sisters, trying to be the protector, trying to, be the man of the house, it put a lot of pressure on me growing up. Brought a lot of insecurities too, because I never thought I was the man of the house, or I didn't have the tools to be the man of the house or to take care of my sisters. So that bring a lot of insecurities. It hold me also sometimes making decisions because I didn't want to fail, just because the society was expecting me to be, make all decisions right. When we are all human beings and we make mistakes. So growing up, it wasn't easy. I think it was probably more mentally, but I don't think I have maybe the support that I needed at that point to make better decisions. I never got in trouble. I want to be clear, but at the same time now, when I think as an adult, I realize that I could have done more to be a better brother, to be a better son, be a better friend. So it's probably something that we're probably going to have deeper conversations now, and I'm excited about having this conversation. So I'm here from all of you guys who have, your experiences growing up, because we all come from different, circles, different areas, and as a Latino living in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, even there are two, countries that speak Spanish, they're totally different. So I'm very happy and excited to hear from you guys.
Thanks, Felix. When I think about myself, I grew up small town, northern Wisconsin, only child in a really loving family. And one of the gifts that my mom actually gave to me is that before I was even born, when I was still when she was still carrying me in her pregnancy, she started to write journal entries about about, what it was like to be carrying me, her hopes for me. And then every month, she basically wrote something about who I was, starting with when I was in the womb, right? And then her noticings from the time that I was born, growing up. I'm about to age 3. It takes a while to get through this stuff, but it's a huge gift. And part of what's a gift about it is that her noticings is I'm like a person who, when I'm born, I'm not affected by socialization very much, right? So these aspects of curiosity, or of myself, that are really essential to who I am, like my curiosity, the way that I play, I've always had like a propensity for being able to feel and understand when other people are in pain, and want to be something that's soothing or helpful. These are things as a very small baby that are being described. And I think about, that's a huge gift to have gotten a little bit of a glimpse of who I was before there was a whole lot of socialization happening, and of who I still am despite the socialization. So I think about the community that I'm from in my own life, and the ways that those like essential truths about me, the way that I cared about others, the joy that was in me, all the potential, that kind of stuff, the way that we are taught collectively as men. First of all, that those parts of us, the parts that care the most for others, the parts that are kind to ourselves, the parts that are kind to others and caring to the well-being of others, are actually a form of weakness, and that there is a sort of way in which, in theory, we live in a society that's supposed to be like an equal playing field that's competitive. That stuff is a lot of mythology, of course, but that idea pushed me into a place where I very much saw my value as in what I could accomplish, what it was, how I compared to other people, if I could be better than other people, and being a straight cisgendered man, in addition to a white man, were all places in which I understood myself in an order of what was normal, and of in some ways what was good. That is very much in opposition to the stuff that I would learn from my mom's journals when I'm very young, and the stuff that I know about the best part of myself now, as I'm sort of healing and learning from some of that stuff. So it's a heartbreaking story in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of hope in it for me around how it is that we raise our children, at least in the community that I come from. We raise our children, we do our best in the environments with them, and yet we are creating a collective agreement, a collective understanding that puts some people as having value more than others, encourages us to treat other people as though they are expendable, as though it's okay for us to get what we want from them. I think specifically about how my classmates, some of my coaches, people in my life taught me about what it meant to be in relationship, and specifically sexual relationship with women, and that even though I remember the feeling of so very badly like wanting to connect with girls that I was going to school with, that part of me that like very much wanted to be in connection, very much wanted to learn and be like, be flexible and very much in like a relationship, also was looking at it through a lens of like, how do I get what I want out of this? How am I in relationship with women? What do I do to actually, explore sex and sexuality more, be positioned as the guy who knows what's going on and is able to have access to women and all that kind of stuff, that put me out of like the mutuality with women and girls and into a relationship where at best I was sort of like in a transaction oftentimes with them. And I hold both of those truths as being, they're both true at the same time. I have an essential part of me that is wanting connection, wanting kindness, wanting to be in good relationship, and then the parts of me that are like a tide moving towards the way that I've been willing when it comes to gender, and when it comes to race, and when it comes to other ways that we categorize people in our society, has been willing to like either close my eyes to or actively participate in ways of getting an upper hand, getting what I want in those relationships and in community. So I think about that and I feel sadness. I sort of mourn the reality that that's collectively where we're at. But I think that facing it and also facing the other parts of the truth about the fact that we're not born wanting to, leverage one another, use violence, things like that. That those are ways that we start to actually face into what's possible about who we are and what we can be.
Well, that's interesting, because I would say that in part music raised me, in the sense of so I was thinking about, as you were talking, I was thinking about sort of the contours or the lines in which you're told what is acceptable and not acceptable. And so I was thinking about this song when I was young called Brick House by this group called the Commodores. And for whatever reason, it's like one of the first songs that seemed like a song that kids on the bus would sing, and they'd bring boom boxes. It was during that era. And everyone was just loving the song, but really what it was transmitting, and there was this collective agreement, was that girls who were young and well-developed, that is the prism. Either they were a brick house or they weren't, right? So it was setting up for me this lens and setting up for my school chums and I sort of a definition, if you will, of what made, this was maybe 6th grade through 8th grade, right? What made a girl attractive, right? So friendships began, and around that time, biologically, friendships that I had would kind of be here, but everyone's attention, including mine, was to the girls who were more developed. Because of that, the narrative of that song and the collective participation of myself and the other boys at the school in going, oh yeah, so that's what makes, that is the value proposition that is that line, right? Which at the time, of course, you don't think of it. You're just having a good time singing the song, but it really is kind of encoding and in you what to look for, right? So that's what I was thinking of as you're talking about sort of the things that raise you up and sort of impress themselves on you.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I have a little bit of a different experience growing up. As a trans man, I identify as queer. I was socialized as female growing up, and it took me a long time to actually figure out who the heck I was. It was well into my 20s when I actually, heard the term transgender for the first time. And so for me, I've thought about it in a lot of different ways, but I sort of felt like, the way that I was raised, everyone around me, myself included, at that time thought of and knew that I was a girl. And so, kind of getting that insider look into what the women and girls and feminine folk that I know experienced, the things that they are taught growing up, to go to the bathroom in a pack, to stay safe, and to carry your keys in your hand when you're walking in a dark parking lot. And all of those things, that young women and girls learn. And then to later, have this realization and figure out who I actually am. And then, that was like the biggest question for me around 25 years. I was reflecting deeply on, okay, I know now who I am. I know that I'm a man. And, what kind of a man am I going to be? What kind of a guy, what kind of a friend, what kind of a, a husband and a father in the future? And so, that was right around the time that I got involved with Men as Peacemakers and some of this movement work. And I was also working and still am working with the trans community here locally as well. And it's a really interesting thing for folks to, figure out their identities later on in life and then really get to think deeply about, okay, what kind of a person am I going to be? What kind of a man, in my case? And yeah, I'm still on that journey. I think all of us, right? We're sitting here talking about that, right? Because it's, there isn't a final destination, but we're all on that road of, how can we be those kind, loving, trustworthy, safe men in our community, and what does that look like? How does it show up in our lives, outside of our home, inside of our home?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that resonates with me and what all of you are sharing is like just this external pressure, right? And I think I agree with Ed on like we're all born, as really whole beings, and then we get bombarded by messages, and that's the policing that I call it, the policing of like the gender roles and the gender ideas about what it means to be a man in this world in the context of even our own cultural communities, like even in the Hmong community, it's very idealistic in terms of like traditional gender roles and that men need to play these things and this is what men do. And though my family may not be doing that with me or giving me those messages, I hear those messages externally, right? Those pressures of external pressures of like, for the longest time, I was the only son in the family and I was the oldest, and it was like, you're the only one, so therefore you better make sure that you help your parents out a lot. All your sisters are going to get married, and obviously, like in the Hmong community, when the women get married, they're off and they're helping their husband's family, and they're no longer a part of your family, like spiritually, right? And so it was just like a lot of external pressure of like, you need to be a good son, right? However, good is being defined, and I'm like, good is like, how is good being defined, right? But it's left up to me to define that. And as long as you're not stealing, as long as you're not joining a gang, as long as you're not like dyeing your hair, as long as you're not wearing baggy clothing, then you're okay. So there was a particular type of like goodness that you had to be, and a good boy that you had to be for me, and a good man that you can come to be, and that it was bad if you became these kinds of boys. But even for those men that I saw and I grew up with who had joined gangs and things like that, and I think it was even much more heavier in terms of like just the unhealthy aspects of masculinity and manhood in gangs, from what they've shared with me and what I've seen as well too, is like when they turn their lives around, right? When they turn their lives around and they became good again, people accepted them in the community. People accepted them in the community, and people welcomed them back and was like, oh, we're going to forgive you. Like, you were able to turn your life around, and we're going to support you, right? So I think reflecting back now, it's like, oh, I could have done whatever, right? And no matter what I would have done, my parents would have been like, I'm still their son, and that they'll still accept me. And I guess that's like the privilege that I have, is that ability to be able to sort of do whatever it is that I want at the same time and still be accepted as long as I'm okay, right? As long as my masculinity doesn't get questioned and my manhood doesn't get questioned, and they still know that I'm going to be marrying a woman at the end of the day, then it'll be okay, right? But if the moment that I'm like, oh, I begin to question my sexual orientation, then it's like, that we may have to, so it's like when my manhood and masculinity becomes questionable in terms. And so I remembered like a few years ago, my partner was like, she was like talking to my mom, and my mom was like, whatever Pheng does, if he's hunting, it's opening weekend this weekend in Wisconsin for archery for deer, and few years ago, she was like, I'm going to support him in doing all those, right? Because they were manly stuff, hunting and archery and whatever. And she's like, I will buy him all his equipment and tools and whatever, right? So he stops gardening. She don't want me to garden anymore. She told that to my partner. It was like, tell him to stop gardening. And as long as he does all of this, I'm going to support all of that, right? So the message didn't come from my dad, but it came from my mom. And I think that's what we're saying. I think we're all sharing here is that the messages come from everybody because everybody believes in these ways of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And that's the only two ways in which you can be. And so for myself, I found my being able to like really relate with a lot of queer men in my life. And that was the place that I found that I was able to actually just like sort of relax and be like, and I knew my masculinity wasn't going to be in question if I didn't play sports or if I didn't walk a certain way or wear certain clothing or talked a certain way or beefed up my chest a little bit firmer when I was with other men. If I didn't do those things, they weren't questioning me on that, right? Gay and queer and trans men weren't questioning me on those experiences, right? They were like, you're just going to be you. It's okay. The world will keep going. And I wasn't, but I felt like when I was with cisgender, straight, heterosexual men, and if that's how they identified, I felt like this tension. It was always walking on tension. And I couldn't let my guard down, and I had to make sure they didn't find me out, right? Because if they found out about my masculinity in any way that I didn't play and I didn't walk the way that people wanted me to walk in terms of being a man and being masculine in this world, doing the manly things, if they found that out, then I would be totally exposed, right? And that exposure would then sort of downplay me and downplay who I was as a man and as a masculine person, and so I think it ties into all of that for me. It ties into the idea of what how I'm defining myself and the idea of sexuality and like this notion of like it has to be this way only and not wanting to expose myself. And nowadays I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm going to just be whatever it is I'm going to be, because I have a good sense of masculinity for myself.
One of the things that, as I listen to you, like all share, and we have the similarities of our experiences and the differences of our experiences, because masculinity and manhood isn't the only way that we're socialized and taught how to be in community and society. Is I think a little bit about the fact that we are, a group of folks who have done work to try to address violence against women and girls, and it makes me think about how what we're talking about, this way that we move from being whole to experiencing, the messages, the pressures, the commonly shared beliefs that put us in, certainly not mutual and oftentimes harmful relationships with other people. Like how that relates to the ways that we don't hear in community, we don't listen and feel and react in community in the ways that we should, and that are actual, like at an essential level, we're probably pulled towards reacting, but we've got so much that's built up that's telling us a different set of things about how we need to be that we don't. So like we've heard, the Women's Foundation of Minnesota does research with the University of Minnesota every couple of years. I mean, in this state, 1 in 3 women are experiencing sexual or domestic violence in their lifetime. And that's a staggering thing to think about, right? But the amount of time and energy that goes into like actually just settling on the reality that that's happening, believing that that's actually happening to people, to the women and girls and trans folks in our lives, believing that that it's not actually the fault of the people that it's happening to, but instead that it's like a problem with how we're actually shaping and creating the individuals and the communities in which we all live. Like that is a hard thing for us to face, and it relates to, we are in a reality right now where every few weeks you're hearing about a new Black man that is murdered or shot or experiences police brutality. And we're in these conditions where, for how long have Black folks in particular, I grew up on a border town, so Native folks have experiences with this too, like since the beginning of the country. Like, how long have we been hearing that folks are experiencing violence and brutality and harm in ways that are unacceptable, damaging, disproportionate, not fair, literally killing people in the community. And it's difficult. Like, part of the way that I'm socialized as a straight white man is to hear those things and discount them, put them through a prism of why it might be something that needs to be looked at a little bit differently than what the people who are actually looking at it are saying and experiencing, and then make decisions and connect with the other people in my community through that lens, which is, undermining and oftentimes kind of patronizing and certainly not particularly helpful. And I'm really curious about what it is when we think about ourselves as men and masculine folks, like in the work that we do to reconnect to the wholeness of who we are as kind, caring, connected, loving people. On the whole, that can look different for people in so many different ways. But what is it that needs to actually happen so that we are hearing about the reality of what people are experiencing in our communities in a way that actually moves us to action, even if it means we got to give some stuff up, even if it means that it's got to be uncomfortable, that things got to change. Like, what does that actually mean and take when we think about the experiences, the different experiences that we have, and how we're socialized and taught to be in community in ways that take advantage of others, frankly.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And also in the way that, at least how I grow up, every time that I was confronted by something, my manhood or anything, I was taught to be aggressive, to be tough, to fight, to use my voice, to use my power, to fight something I wasn't, that didn't agree, or a situation that I feel that I was losing, So how I start using that power in order to control others, and how you can see that power used right now, by the systems, to control communities, to isolate communities, and how that affects us. So that's something that's very important to have this conversation right now, just in order to have a better understanding how everything started, from colonialism, racism, slaves, everything, start in a point, and what we need to do right now to start breaking that and start changing that culture that exists right now that affects communities of color, and how to be sure that our sons and daughters have a better understanding and better allies.
I know for me, this is making me think about performance, and, as a white person trying to, learn my role and what can I do to like bring this connection? How can I be a part of like reconnecting to this way that, our communities have been in the past, and you hear that term performative ally all the time. And I was thinking about after Pheng had spoken and shared, and it almost feels like we all are performing this like sort of version of masculinity. We're performing the way that we think, the world wants to see men and masculine folks show up. White folks are, doing our best to try to perform and be allies. But what does it actually mean to like get away from that performative piece? And for me, personally, it makes me think about how, disconnected I was for so long from my own masculinity, the ways that, you know, we see the other guys and what they're doing and, oh, we got to be just like that. And I just, you know, there's so many parts of each of us, you know, like there's so much depth to each of us individually. You know, so I think it's like we can start there, right? To really like figure out, who am I? Like, what are the things that I love doing? What are the ways that I want to show up in community? And then like bringing it out into this bigger picture of like, wow, how can we be in community then once we all are really like leaning into this, living our full, you know, authentic selves? And then, yeah, what does it look like when we bring that into community and other folks are figuring out how to like really shed this, this mask, this performative thing that we all sort of put on automatically. It's sort of so ingrained, you know, so really peeling that back, feels difficult and it feels scary, and also like it gives me so much excitement and hope for like what could be. So I'm curious what y'all think about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, you know, in terms of, and your question about like the connection and um in terms of what it is and what we want. I think it's not hard, right? It's not actually really hard, and it doesn't have to be something that is really deep and meaningful and compelling, even though that's what I think transformation requires, that obviously. But it's actually very simple. And I think when you were talking, Ed, I was, and you too, Sean, I was thinking about like um, a few years ago when I was attending this group in the north side of Minneapolis, and it was a group of Black men that I met every week to have similar conversations that we are all having here. And the lead person in that group, he said to this one young man, he was like, "All you really need to go home is just go and take care of your family the way that you're supposed to, in a way that's not violent. It's not hard. Just go and do that." If every one of us went and did that, that would probably reduce or end some of the violence that we see, right? But like, that's very simple, but it's really hard to do, because then it's like you have all these pressures that we're talking about, right? You have all these other messages that people are saying, and then you have institutions that you're talking about, Felix, that have been so ingrained in the ideas and the notions of what it means to be, uh, how men are supposed to be and how women are supposed to be, and how we treat men and how we treat women, and that those are the only two ways in which we see gender only, right? So it's been institutionalized into our policies at the state level, at offices and at organizations, and it controls and dictates how we move and behave in those office settings and in our interaction of delivering services and things like that. It, and then we're like, oh, that's how I am at work, and then I'm at home. This is something I do something else, you know. And we've seen that with men who, I think one of the things that I raised a while back is like, let's not forget how we participate in allowing for this violence to actually happen. Let's not forget about critiquing and pushing ourselves in how we participate in that violence. You know, so going back to Ed's question, is like, I don't join conversations that degrade women, gender nonconforming folks, and girls and queer folks. I don't join those conversations, because I know that joining those conversations creates the conditions that allow for other men to say it's okay to beat women, it's okay to use violence towards women. I know, I worked with so many men that I know that men all know that it's wrong to hit women. That's not the message we're trying to tell men. What I'm asking and what I'm saying we need to investigate more is, why and how did you get to that place where you believe that that was the choice you were going to make, right? That's the question we need to be asking ourselves as men, is like, how did I get to that place? What was my thinking that allowed me? And generally, what I've seen is that generally it's really like, it's these rational messages that we get, rationalizing messages that we get, that it's okay for men to do these things, that it's okay that you do this, because there's no consequences. There's no real consequences to what it is that I'm doing. If I were to harm or if I were to do something bad or call a woman out, there was like, oh, he's just being a boy, or he's just doing what men do, and that's how men are, and it'll be okay. Or we see with a lot of the cases where a lot of these young white college male age students actually are involved in rape cases on campus, and everybody's like, oh my God, you've ruined his life and you ruined his career. But the moment it's a man of color, particularly a black man, then it's like, oh my God, well, she is so innocent, you know, and I don't want to say it in that very bad, heinous way, but like, he's not perfect and he deserved every kind of punishment that should be held like towards him, right? And we've seen men, you know, who are like, who understand all of these issues and at the end of the day are part of it. We've seen that with like the Robbinsdale police chief, who was a part of all of this, you know, and then he was running a sex trafficking ring. We've seen that with a Department of Health official who joined in all of our groups in Minnesota here around violence against women and girls and kids, and then found out that he was sexually assaulting kids, and it was like, oh my God. So like, I think these are things that we really have to look at in terms of how we contribute, and there's no ideal way of like, oh, we are healthy now, you know. And how do we give men and ourselves the tools to navigate the messages and the challenges and the consequences of what it means to be, if we don't perform in the way that you're talking about, Sean, is if I don't perform masculinity in the way that it's expected, there's a consequence to me. There's a consequence to me. And I know that particularly for young boys and men, it's even harder for them. They lose friends, they're by themselves, they get bullied, they get called a wuss, they get called all sorts of names, right? They become the outcast, they don't get included. And it drains them. And then they think about suicide and they commit suicide. And that's what we see in terms of like suicide with men and masculine folks, is a lot of it has to do with their male identity and not being accepted. You know?
I think this continue to happen just because also maybe we don't get the support of the systems, or there's no resources to provide, spaces to have this type of conversations, to, seeing the importance, I'm sorry, of voting, of, electing individuals that are similar to you, they understand the communities in order to be sure these communities succeed, and we start having this conversation in order to, unbreak, to break, unhealthy masculinity, and be sure these systems are accountable also. It's something that I talked in the past with you guys, or before, about systems right now think because you went through a webinar about racism now, there's a check mark. Okay, we're good now. As a system, we achieved this webinar. Now we're prepared to talk about racism and to support the communities when they don't really have an understanding, how deep, is this trauma that exists in a lot of our communities through, the racism, the slave colonialism, and how, this continue to happen. I think this is really deep in our culture, and how we can support each other is the key. As a community, work together, support each other, and be vulnerable. Admit when we're making mistakes, because I make mistakes every single day. I'm still learning. I'm a human being. I grew up, in a community that's very homophobic, and I can still see that on me. For me to hold hand with another man, it's like, oh, I'm not doing this. Just because in my mind it's like, okay, this is, it's not very manly to hold another man's hand. So that stuff's still in me, and how we can start understanding, how that affect me, and how we can have that conversation with other men or young men that, like you guys mentioned before, they're getting all this information from the TV, video games, movies, how they can continue contributing to this culture, and how we can, start making the right steps in order to break that.
I think that one thing that I think about is when you were talking about the description, Pheng, of how, for instance, you can just predict on a college campus how a sexual assault will be talked about, how the perpetrator will be talked about, how the victim will be talked about um, based on gender and based on race. Like that's actually we see that replicated over and over and over in ways for us. We certainly see it in when we're talking about violence against women and girls, but I also see it. I mean, when I'm in white community, for instance, talking about whichever police murder has happened most recently, you know, it's a very similar conversation, right? Like the way that we talk about the police officers, and we don't want to ruin their lives, and that they're doing the best that they can, and all that kind of stuff. In conditions when we're just racking up examples of the types of violence that certainly have no excuse and are tied to a broader pattern of what's happening. And then even beyond that still, it's like everybody, there's lots of conversation around state violence, police brutality, that it's happening right now. And so often, at least in my communities, like the conversations that I'm having with people are turning to like, well, are police good people or not? Are these people who are doing their best? Like, these are the systems that are supposed to protect us. So like, we need to support the people who are doing that dangerous work, that kind of stuff, right? And I think that one of the things that that is really important to like connect to how we're socialized as people who have power, and as people who have more access to resources, and as people who have more access to privilege, is that a part of what we're doing is we are like we are stepping back. We're distancing ourselves from the responsibility to say we are actually responsible for a community where everybody's well-being is valued. We are actually responsible for a community where there isn't a disproportionate amount of violence used against Black folks, Native folks, people of color, women experiencing sexual and domestic violence. We are actually responsible to show up. Like, what would it actually take for community to say, we see that this big incident happened. What does accountability look like in our small town or in our big town? Like, what data do we need people to be taking? Or what ways are we going to redistribute funding and look at how to solve our particular the particular issues that our community are facing? And like, we separate ourselves from the responsibility of actually facing those big questions and getting back into some semblance of right relationship with one another when we jump to the question about whether or not people are good, whether or not systems are doing their best, all of this kind of stuff, right? Like that is a conversation that only allows for us to sit in the position that we're currently in, which in my case, and in the communities I'm talking to, these systems, whether we're talking about the way that we look at women and girls, or whether we're talking about the way that policing is done in communities of color, they protect the privileges, they protect the way that resources flow, they keep the status quo the way that they are. And from a material perspective, from a power perspective, there's a lot of benefit to that. There isn't a lot of benefit to that if you're talking about who we are in terms of like our humanity, our spiritual selves, our connection to one another. And I think that's I mean, it's a big topic to open, but we are in a place where we have to take a real look at how we're allowing the way that we understand ourselves to be the way that we understand ourselves because of our socialization and our identities, particularly people who have privilege and power, and the responsibility that we have to look at that very carefully and see what the impact is on community. And we don't have years to like sort this out. It's happening right now, right? So like, so how is it that that we are showing up in particular in ways where we can hear what the people who are experiencing it are saying, and be in some sort of useful relationship to that.
I like the comment about performative and how we're in performance so often, and the relationship of performance to sort of authenticity, right? Because in part you're always sort of gauging, well, often you're gauging sort of what the room is saying. So like when I'm at the table with the Women's Foundation, I am gauging sort of and monitoring, if you will, every moment I'm there, right? Because I think that there is a trust that's given by being invited into that particular circle, and in any circle, right? There's a trust, and so I think you're always, at least I feel you're always in part performing to see if you're, to make sure you're kind of meeting the expectations of the group that you're in. Oprah says this thing often that when people, she said this thing that said, when people show you themselves, show you who they are, believe them. And she was speaking of it in sort of like when someone does something wrong and they show you themselves, believe them, right? So that you don't fall into thinking that that was just a one-off. And I think that using that when we're thinking about comments that the folks around us are making, when we're like, oh, I'm going to let that go because that isn't harmful. I think maybe thinking more about sort of believing that and addressing it with a seriousness, with a compassionate seriousness, can be helpful, right? Because that is sort of hearing a young guy and taking seriously what he said and the ramifications down the line for it, and addressing it now in the spirit of, I love you, right? And I heard you, and I see you, and I have to share this with you. I think that can be really sort of helpful for us, so that it normalizes the things that how we're used to sort of engaging people. And I think it would also help me, be really expeditious about it. Because sometimes we don't do that because we're like, do I have time to go down this road, right? And so we let lots of things mushroom because we're like, oh, I just haven't got time to go down this road. But I think that if I did things like that more often, I would become very efficient about saying, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Here's the message. Here's the love. This isn't an end. This is just letting you know what I think I heard, right? I think that that's something I would like to practice more, so that the performance, if you will, results positively in the landscape that myself and other folks believe that manhood and masculinity affords them.
Thank you, Roderic. I think that, yeah, sounds like we are moving the conversation into like this place of like, what's our responsibility as men folks and masculine folks, right? In this, which then contributes to what Ed, you were talking about in terms of community accountability. And I think that that's a good conversation and a good segue for us to sort of like pause this conversation here and really pick it up in 2 weeks and really continue the conversation about what's our responsibility in all of this, right? In the violence that we're all seeing. And then our personal responsibility to that as men and masculine folks. And then what's our community responsibility to that, as Ed was talking, because when we're really looking at it, what I've learned over the years in working with people who've harmed is they know the person who they harmed. They know the person who they did violence towards. It wasn't some stranger that they met. Very few times it was a stranger. Most of the time it was somebody that they knew. And then it begs me to ask the question, then are we willing to call the police on those people? And most of the time what I've seen is that, at least in the Hmong community, we aren't willing to call the police on dad, who's the one that is creating the harm. We aren't willing to call the police on brother, who's the one that's touching his sister, right? So I think that that's one of the things that we really think about is protection from who, and what does safety look like for our communities, right? Because we know, and I think the narrative out there really is, it's strangers. It's these strange people that are going to hurt us. And who are these strangers? And we're taught, obviously, that these strangers are Black folks or people of color. And I think those things are real, and that it's like, that's why we need protection from the police, from those people, right? And so I think it's a real conversation for us to really explore in 2 weeks here about what's our responsibility to this as men, and then what's our community accountability practices as men and masculine folks. Because men and masculine folks need to be accountable and should be accountable, and needs to also think about what community accountability looks like as well too. So sort of end it there. I always appreciate my closing here, and I'll give you each an opportunity to sort of close too, and then Sean can have the last word on the logistics piece as always. But I think I always appreciate this because I continue to learn about like where we are in this moment and where we as men and masculine folks are, and the struggles that we each are moving through. And in this space, at least I get to be able to name that struggle. I'm able to actually share that struggle, and I'm able to actually connect with others in that struggle. And so it doesn't feel so like alone and isolating in me thinking about it by myself, but at least I'm being able to actually have conversations with others. So that's relieving. And I think that that's the work that Roderic was talking about in terms of like, I need to, and we're practicing is the emotional commitment to each other as men. And I continue to practice that. So thank you for that.
I would say it's good to be in communion and being encouraged to be wholly healthy.
I think for me, it's important of listening right now. As the time we're healing is to listen to others, do not assume. Understand our privilege. We all come with some privilege, certain things, and how we can support better each other, you know, and the importance of making decisions that will benefit not just, in my situation, Latinos or immigrants or undocumented Latinos, but make decisions that will benefit all in general, and create a new culture, a new masculinity that, you know, will be a better example for future generations.
I just appreciate, as always, the ability to actually, you know, be at a table, as close to a table as we can together, having the space to actually, you know, share and try to, share where we're at with these things and learn from one another. I'm carrying this piece about performance, and I think, you know, Roderic, when you talked about like really taking seriously where people are coming from a variety of different perspectives, like that comes from so many different ways, from the places people come from goodness and the places that people come from harm. I'm thinking about what that actually means at depth to do that and accept a responsibility for that in relationship with folks. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm just feeling very grateful for this conversation. For me, what's coming up and that I'll sort of be thinking about until next time is just, you know, my own relationships and friendships with other men, other masculine folks, non-binary folks who identify more masculinely. You know, how deep are those relationships? Are we having, you know, these conversations, or are we sort of just staying surfacey? You know, so I think that's a challenge for me personally. And then, yeah, broadening that. What does it look like when all of us are having these conversations where we can then come together and look at, you know, how can we create safe communities for everyone? So thank you again. If you've tuned in to hear our conversation, we're glad that you have been with us and stayed here and are a part of this with us. Also want to thank Pheng and Roderic, Ed and Felix for again joining us and just having this chat together. So if this is your first time connecting in with us, I'm going to link our first episode, our first conversation down in the description below, so you can check that out, and then make sure that you subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. That way you'll get all the notifications and updates about when our next conversations are coming out and when they're available. Please feel free to share this with all of the folks in your life, men, masculine, feminine, women, everybody. Let's all come together around these conversations. And if you have questions or comments, we would love to hear them. So comment those below in the comments, and we'd love to be able to talk more about your questions too. So thank you again to everybody here. Hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and we will reconnect in 2 weeks.